And I know most people have homeowners insurance, and the first thing that the average parent's going to do is, if that situation arises, is going to make that phone call to their homeowner insurer to say, I've had a claim made against us. I want you to come in and defend us, and we have insurance coverage. First thing the insurer is going to do is going to point out the exclusion portion of that policy. Specific exclusions for intentional acts and for acts caused by criminal activity. And jurisprudence is clear. You provide alcohol to minors, in addition to it being a criminal act, it's considered an intentional act. And what the insurer is going to tell you is, we don't cover you for this. Likewise, we're now starting to see, and I had the first case in my court just a couple of weeks ago, automobile policies with those same exclusions that says they will not cover any damage, personal injury caused by a criminal act or an intentional act. And driving while intoxicated is going to be considered a criminal act. That you're engaged in the commission of a crime. When this accident occurs, they'll have a legal basis to exclude coverage on your liability policy for your automobile.
So parents can be held both criminally
and civilly liable. They can serve time and get hit in the pocketbook, both.
I think most folks are very aware now of the dangers, the acute danger of underage drinking, and that is having a young person get behind the wheel of a vehicle or get in the car with someone who's been drinking. But what sorts of social harms are there, in addition to traffic crashes, that young people face when they begin drinking before age 21?
Well, we know big one is decision making. You know, we know with young people, we're already concerned about the decisions, about their decision making ability and their ability to judge, make judgments. And alcohol does not increase that ability. It does just the opposite. And so things like date rape, and there was a recent article I read where it's interesting that some of the rates we're seeing now, where we used to blame date rape on substances put into a drink, we're actually finding now that alcohol is being looked at as a primary date rape type drug, because many times these things happen with people who are under the influence. And so parents have to remember again that as a parent, you want your child to make the best decision, and you want to teach them to make the best decision, and they can do that better when they're not intoxicated, when they're not under the influence.
I've also read that in cases of young people being involved in violent crimes, Judge Morvant, either as the victim or the perpetrator, that oftentimes alcohol is a factor. Do you see that?
I would venture to guess probably about 80 to 85% of the crimes we see somehow involve either alcohol or other drugs. It's a factor, either the motivating factor for committing the crime, or the crime was committed while under the influence of either drugs or alcohol. It's very, very prevalent in the criminal justice system.
Probably the crime that we all associate the most with drinking is drunk driving. And so Donna Tate, State Executive Director of MAD, is here and can talk to us a little bit about some of the statistics involving young people. How big of a problem is it when you look at drunk driving numbers in our state, and what do you see on your end?
About half of our fatalities on the roadways are caused by alcohol-related crashes. And in our driver population, the 15 to 20-year-olds represent about 7.6% of our licensed drivers, but they represent 13% of our alcohol-related traffic fatalities. So it's really disproportionate to the number of drivers that are on the road in that age group as opposed to the number of crashes that actually take place. The 18 to 20-year-olds are particularly of interest because their crash rate in alcohol-related crashes is twice that of the average driver.
So we're dealing basically with people who are still new at driving, because it does take several years to get very skilled at that, and new at drinking, and certainly taking in a substance that's affecting their brain differently than it would an adult, which is something we'll talk to Dr. Cataldi about in a minute. Isn't the legal limit for intoxication different for young people as compared to adults?
Absolutely. In Louisiana, 0.08 is the legal limit for adults over 21. Under 21, we have a zero tolerance law. So if you are impaired at 0.02 or above, then you are actually considered drunk if you're under 21, if you're behind the wheel operating a car.
And 0.02 is just a very small measurable amount of alcohol.
Absolutely.
So if they've even had less than a drink, that would be something that would show up on
Potentially,
the blood alcohol test. That's very interesting. Well, you know, we hear a lot about this 18-year-old versus 21-year-old drinking age, and of course it was at one time 18 and was raised in the mid-90s in Louisiana to 21. But so many people, especially in this day and age when we have young people serving our country overseas, are concerned that while we allow 18, 19, and 20-year-olds to fight for our country and indeed lay down their lives for our country, when they come home, we're not allowing them to drink. How do you defend the 21-year-old drinking age against that argument?
Well, it's a very popular argument, and I always start by saying that the Pentagon has been a long time one of the strongest advocates for the minimum drinking age being 21. Prior to that being mandatory across the nation, they lost nearly a battalion of troops every year to drunk driving, and where their leadership is not advocating for it, it's a strong argument against making that change. Additionally, when you look at it, we have lots of rites and rites of passage that occur at different ages, and they're set there because there are developmental milestones, there are intellectual readiness points of development for people, and there's a rationale and a logic behind it, a science behind it, if you will. So when you look at the minimum drinking age law, brain development is the primary focus behind that. One, you want to be intellectually ready, and many people don't know their brains continue to develop until their mid-20s. And the key parts of the brain that control reasoning and memory and your judgment, your inhibitions, are the last to mature. So you're still growing and developing between that 18 to 20-year-old period, and you're not really developmentally or intellectually ready for the implications of that. It can have permanent consequences to your development.
Well, maybe we could help our young people be ready by teaching them to drink responsibly. I know I've often heard it said that in Europe, where parents have their children drinking wine with the family as part of the meal from a very early age, that those parents have indeed taught their children how to drink responsibly, and that they really have a more realistic approach in the European countries than we do. What would you say to that argument?
Well, that's another good myth, and unfortunately the myths are a lot more popular than the facts sometimes. In 2003, the European did a study across Europe's different nations, and it was the 2003 European School Survey Project on alcohol and drugs. And what they found was that most European countries, young people had much higher intoxication rates than they do in the United States, and less than 25% had lower or equivalent intoxication rates as compared to the United States. Additionally, they had a significantly higher proportion of students who reported binge drinking on a regular basis than compared to their U.S. counterparts. So clearly, that may be a more common practice, but it is certainly not a fact that they are more responsible drinkers. Europe certainly has a significant problem with youth alcohol use and abuse.